A Turtle Named Fluffy by Zane Austen. For Marie. The trees swayed in a violent and low lull in the wind. The light of day dimmed, and the night was accompanied by a storm, colder and noisier than any other in recent days. Huge brown-bark trees began to crack and creak at the stems, as if in pain, as the howling wind yanked at them like an angry giant. The rain spat out of the sky and leaked into every hole and crevice in the woods. Somewhere outside of the free stretches of land in Bolivar, Missouri, an old man with grim wrinkles and soft blue eyes watched the crystal streams drizzling down his window as he was serenaded by the rhythmic little drops upon his roof. It soothed his lonely heart and entertained his aged spirit, the way only nature can. Slowed down by advancing age, he knew little of the adventures and happenings upon his 30 acres of land. He had grown too stiff and tired to tame it and make it look as it should. The surrounding trees and thick shrubbery, with vibrant color and regal pride, had turned wild and rebellious. It seemed to him that it had happened overnight. Unable to withstand the forces of God, he had grown accustomed to sitting down and staying down, letting his mind wander to strange lands and peculiar thoughts, not to mention prattling on and on to himself about the merry past when he still had glimpses of joy. In turn, his passiveness to the encroaching ranks of Mother Earth grew to stages of instinctual blindness. So, not surprisingly, he had no idea that on his land, at that very moment, while he welcomed the storm, that a bony cat shivered in the wet cold. A cat who called herself Lula. There was no escaping the paralyzing dread of the raging tempest. At every turn, the poor feline was drenched in wretched water and spooked by a new flash of light with its signature explosive roar ripping at her pointy, sensitive ears. Finally, a hollow of roots below a massive tree came into view. She bolted inside with a racing heart and heavy breath. The sound was not quite so hostile there. Once her breathing slowed and her tail loosened up, she sighed and rested on a small patch of dry dirt. The hollow was not only a brace against the rain and the cold, but a shelter from the fear and the chaos of the open wilderness. It was no place for a common house cat, but how could she know such a thing, being born in the wild? To her, this was life, and it would not be a long one. She either would starve to death one day, or become food for some larger predator. These troubles loomed over her, sometimes. But not tonight. Tonight, she was exhausted, and relieved only by the fact that she was in a safe place. Such knowledge was enough to put her into a deep slumber. The morning looked nothing like the night before. The sun shined down brightly on the green leaves and ripe, lively brush. The damp remains of the past evening were already being cleared away by the rising summer heat. Lula woke up quite refreshed. Stretching out her long, flexible spine and tail, she wondered how long she had been out. She bathed her dark, grimy fur with her sandpaper tongue, muscling past several unknown and unpleasant tastes, and made sure to clean her sharp, needle-like claws. The hollow was quiet as she sat there, reveling in the blessing of at least a few tranquil moments. Her belly met the ground again, as she felt no need to rush back into the horrors of the forest. Suddenly, the dirt beneath her paws moved. The gravel slowly shifted as though something were under it. Had a creepy crawly been under her the entire time she slept? Her penetrating yellow eyes narrowed in on the scene as she returned to her paws with ease. The tunneling was not reckless and abrupt, but slow and curious. Lula's head weaved around in the still air, watching as something finally peeked out from the moist dirt. A tiny, rough, leathery leg poked out and groped around for footing. Overtaken by the unfamiliar sight, Lula's small pink nose inched up to the dugout hole and ran right into the green, gentle moving beak of a baby box turtle. Feeling the bump of her nose against his and the light of the sun, the baby opened its massive eyes, revealing perfect light brown globes that shined like stars on a clear spring night. Lula's jaw dropped at the sight. Her shocked face and bristly whiskers was his first sight after hatching from his little egg. Staring at each other a long time, the babe opened its mouth into a smile, the heart-melting look a child gives when it recognizes its parents. "Mama," he said. This broke Lula out of her frozen state and changed it to denial. She sat up eyeing this baby turtle with a joyful smile glued to its face. Her paw crept out to him and shuffled him around. He still smiled at her. She nudged him further away. He still smiled at her. She turned him on his shell to face the opposite direction. This time he turned around and sloppily marched back over to her. "Mama," he called. She pushed him away again. "Stop saying that." The babe would not be deterred in his joy. He stumbled back over to her, reaching her fur, and rubbed his face in it. "Mama." He rested his chin on her hind leg as she sat. He gazed up at her. Meeting his eyes once more, she felt an overwhelming warmth enter her, different than anything else she had ever felt before. Her nose met up with him and puffed in his reptile aroma. Strange. Lula investigated the burrow from which he had emerged. Deeper down, she only found the broken white remains of his shell, and no others. She peered out into the wilderness beyond the hollow, but could see nothing. She didn't know any turtles, but she knew without a doubt this little guy would die if he was left alone. The next week was quite unusual for Lula. She could not travel far or for too long. The babe was full of energy and love for who he believed to be his mother. He never cried, only rejoiced when she returned to him in the hollow, which they both grew to call home. It was no chore to feed him. He ate close to anything he came across, chomping on leaves, flowers, mushrooms, and even bugs. Lula had a hard time with this discovery. Searching for food for herself was a monstrous task. It did not take much to sustain her small, wiry frame, but meat was hard to come by. Sometimes she would find a mole or a mouse to eat. Other times her tummy would growl with hunger, but not for a lack of searching. Many months passed, and the babe's shell grew thick and wide. One afternoon, Lula watched him devour more nasty green plants. Her ears shifted and turned to every new sound. He was still a child, she thought, and still needed to be watched. Licking the grime away from one of her paws, she turned to see the turtle attempting the same move, reaching his long neck to his foot He stuck out his spongy tongue to lick his foot without success. Lula could not help but grin at how silly he looked. He then gave up and asked a question. "Mama, what is my name?" Lula was hesitant to answer. She had long pondered what to call him, but always ended up just saying Turtle or Little One. "I don't know. What is your name?" she asked, attempting to joke. "I don't know," he replied. "That's why I'm asking you." "I don't know any names. I've never had to think about it before I met you." "You didn't meet me, Mama. You had me, silly." Anyways, I don't know. Fluffy. No, that's no good." The little box turtle perked up and smiled his gigantic smile. "Fluffy? Yeah, Fluffy. Just like your fur is fluffy. I'm fluffy too." Lula started shaking her head. No, I didn't mean... Just like you, Mama." The kid skipped away, as well as a turtle could skip, bobbing awkwardly to the right and the left with excitement. He shouted his new name out to the trees, while his mother smacked her paw over her face. The old man had not gone out that day. He rarely did. The trappings of his old home and the rustic decorations told tall tales of great adventure. The mantled heads of elk, deer, and even a cougar staring back at him, all with their hollow eyes, and the resting steel of an old rifle gleaming in the light. All lies. He was no adventurer. His home was a delusion, a long-awaited and hard-earned delusion, so dank and so thick, his wife could no longer stand him. She left years ago, but he did nothing to make himself less lonely. A dog may have done the trick the way they often do with lonely men, but there were none to be found. A dog, a Labrador Retriever, or a German Shepherd would have been enough. Someone to talk to, and even to watch out for his land while it played. It would stave off intruders, or at least make them move along if they came. Without a dog, however, all kinds of critters routinely invaded his property. Tonight, it was a coyote. The trail back home to the hollow was filled with childish songs from a turtle and heavy eye rolls from a cat. The only lyric being sung was Fluffy. Moving slower than usual, Lula noticed the sun was going down, and she urged her little reptile along. Her tail bushed and back arched in an instant. She could not say with words what her keen nighttime sight spied several feet from the hollow. 2 glowing eyes watching them in the dark. Fluffy did not hear his mother behind him, so he paused and looked back. The fright on her face made him look about, but his turtle eyes saw nothing. "Mama, what's wrong?" But before he could finish, a flash of teeth and fur passed by him. A hungry, vicious animal, bigger than any he had seen before, rushed after his mother. Lula hissed and leapt up the nearest tree, her claws racing up with frantic scratching sounds on the bark. The coyote yelped at her, while she found footing on a thick branch and hissed back at him. Instinctively, she saved herself, but Fluffy came waddling behind, shouting, "Mama!" The predator turned and headed for him. There was a scuffle that Lula could not quite make out. Dry, dead leaves crackled and fluttered all about in the scattered attacks by the coyote. "No!" she cried. The coyote took one last look at her and ran off with a growl. She dropped down from the tree, spastically peeling dead plants away from the dirt, calling for her little one. Dreading he had been eaten whole by that evil thing, she cried out again, "No, no, no! Fluffy, where are you?" "Here I am, Mama." His voice was sweet music to her tattered soul. She turned and found only his head poking out of his shell. "How did you—" "He couldn't catch me. We showed him, huh?" All four of his feet poked back out, and he stood up. Safe back in their hollow, the kid turtle nestled himself up to the cat already laying comfortably in her sleeping spot. "You climbed that tree really fast," he said. "Yeah," she replied with stress in her voice. "How come I can't climb trees?" "Because, little one." "Because why?" he insisted. "I just want to be like you." She told him, "We are just different. Very different." "I don't want to be different." "It's okay to be different. And it's okay if you want your name to be Fluffy." She watched his smile spread across his mouth as she finally said it. He couldn't be fazed, this little one. She had been sure, only moments ago, she had lost him forever. Kissing her odd son goodnight, she vowed to never leave him in danger again. 2 years passed by with warm winters. The old man had begun to visit the old pond on his property. His mind was trailing off to odd places now. So much so that he began to speak with plants and trees. Strange behavior, although it seemed bound to happen. He attempted to pick up fishing again for a passing fancy, if nothing else, fiddling with the hook and bobber like a child, but finally managing to cast it off into the water with a little zeal. The twitching of the reel in his hand and the rickety cast each time was a peculiar sight to all the creatures watching him. The most intrigued was Fluffy. Perched on a rock and simply fascinated by the creature that had 4 legs but only walked on 2. His movements and sounds made no sense to him. What was it exactly? Where did it live? What was it doing? The old man began to chuckle as he got a hit on his line that tugged and pulled on his pole. Reeling the line in with glee, a plump bluegill flapped and wriggled for its life on the hook. Fluffy watched closely as he stripped the fish off the hook and tossed it into a bucket full of water for safekeeping. "Ha! He's been out here for hours, and that's his first catch," said an old, croaky voice. "Whoa! How long have you been standing there?" asked Fluffy in surprise. A large, pimply toad with a huge, slick mouth sat in between the blades of the tall grass on the bank of the pond. "Long enough," he laughed. "What is he doing?" "He's catching fish." Fluffy spoke with confusion on his face. "I don't understand." "He puts worms on a hook and a long string and throws it into the water, and the fish get caught on the hook." "I've never seen fish that big before." "Why in the world not? You're a turtle." "My mother doesn't like it when I stay in the water too long." "Your mother?" "Yeah," Fluffy replied. "Did you say he has worms over there?" "Yes, but—" "I love worms!" Fluffy raced off with speed the toad had never before seen in a turtle. Mimicking the movements of his mother did not make him able to climb trees, but it made him light on his feet. It did not take long for the old man to notice a small box turtle charging in his direction, rustling up the grass and weeds as he went. Fluffy stopped at the bank and looked at the giant man with curiosity, spying a foam cup full of dirt and smelling the slimy aroma of worms. Fluffy lunged for the cup, knocking it over and gorging on wiggly dirt monsters. The old man was quite entertained. "Oh, so that's what you were after, little fella. Help yourself." The old man took particular note of Fluffy's shell, round and beautiful, with yellow circular designs perfectly sectioned off across his back. He marched back towards the toad, licking his chops, and the toad sat with his mouth wide open, silently watching him strut away, smiley and full. Fluffy waited in tall sage-colored weeds while his mother was hunting. His stomach was already full, and he felt right as rain, letting his mind trail off. Suddenly, a single little knock came to his shell. He turned to his right and glanced around, finding the caller, a puny grasshopper with bony yellow legs and beady brown eyes. Not addressing the bug in any way, it knocked again on the side of his hard shell, smacking against it with its tiny body. Fluffy was puzzled and watched the possessed insect with long legs finally fly up and hit him in the head. Bowing to his impulse of annoyance and anger, he darted his eyes around for witnesses, then brought his leathery foot down, squashing it flat before it could hop away. A grin graced his face as he smeared the gushy green insides of the hopper on the ground in an attempt to clean himself. This was a more amusing day for him compared to the many others before, waiting alone with a vow of silence so that his mother could hunt some unfortunate rodent without ever being heard. He observed that those days had oddly gotten longer. "Fluffy, it's time to go home," said his mother. "What did you catch?" She did not answer him, which made him a bit sad. They walked home with no sound but the birds chirping their last conversations for the day in the falling sun. Lula carried no small furry trophy between her teeth, and her slithery stride slowed into a mopey march. The boy watched his mother retire to her spot in the hollow with no dinner. Other days his free mind would not have concerned itself, but he sensed a change he did not yet understand. "Mom, aren't you hungry?" "No, my dear, I'm fine." "But you always eat dinner before bed." "Fluffy, it's fine, baby, come here. It's time to sleep." He felt a pleasant, sudden warmth as he snuggled up to his furry guardian. Lula began to purr as she closed her eyes. Fluffy watched her and tried to gurgle a sound in his throat that came out as nothing more than a sharp, wet rattle. "What are you doing?" she asked, opening one eye. "I'm trying to purr," he whispered as he concentrated and made the unpleasant sound again. She licked his head and told him to go to sleep. Fluffy's mind grew quiet, but his heart was still awake and unsettled. For many weeks in a row he had watched the old man fish in his pond often. Obsessed with the pink-skinned creature that fed him worms, he spent more and more of his time by the pond, away from Lula. Soaking in the cool ripples, Fluffy paddled along until he was finished swimming and got out. He reached his rough, stubby limbs up to his plump tongue and groomed himself, trying to reach every drop of water on his body. He performed this ritual only long enough to notice the toad a few feet away, watching him. "I've never seen a turtle lick himself like that before," said the toad. "I've never seen a toad so fat before," Fluffy quickly said back, narrowing his eyes.
That's a good one, my boy.
Who are you anyway? Fluffy asked. And why do you keep spying on me?
I'm just an old toad who likes to watch folks. And spying? Hardly. I haven't moved from this spot for hours. Maybe you just don't pay attention. I just have never seen anything like you, boy. You must be the strangest turtle in the whole wood.
How would you know?
I've met many turtles, son, and none of them act like you.
Maybe I'm just the best one, then, Fluffy suggested.
You sure have an attitude, don't you? Why do you lick yourself? Explain it to me.
My mother does it, so I do it.
Ah, yes, your mother. And who is your mother?
Her name is Lula.
I know nearly every creature in this wood, said the toad. And I know Lula ain't your mother.
Yes, she is.
Son, she can't be your mother. She's a cat. And you're a turtle. It's time you learned that.
I know what I am, said Fluffy, more annoyed than angry. Fluffy stomped away, huffing and puffing. During their talk, neither the turtle nor the toad noticed the old man collect his things and retreat back to his home on foot. Fluffy was caught in a cloud of rage and wandered onto the beaten trail of small rocks and broken up cement. When he paused to look at his surroundings, he saw the old man heading back towards his house. Caught in the seesaw of emotion, he followed after the old man as fast as he could, soaking in the view of open space that led to his home and truck. The screen door clanged behind the old man as Fluffy rushed behind, watching every move. He eyed the house with awe and wonder. The pink-skinned animal lived here? He took several trips around the house, exploring the brown bricks and the green paint peeling on the back deck. Fluffy was amazed. In the excitement, he noticed the sun going down and started back for the hollow. Mother would be worried sick. Fluffy wandered around for a long time in the growing darkness until he found the hollow again. He wondered why his mother had not come to find him, as she often did when he was lost. She always could find him, but she did not come this time. The hollow was dark, but the moonlight showed Lula resting in her spot like always. Fluffy became worried. He tiptoed up to her and licked her nose. She moved slightly, pushing her left paw out towards him, but she was still asleep. Fluffy thoughtfully placed his foot next to hers, unable to ignore the things that had now become crystal clear to him. No matter how hard he wished it, he was not like Lula. He found his own spot in the hollow and laid down. For the first time in his life, he wept. The next few weeks went by as usual, but with one big difference. Fluffy's happy mood had taken a dive. He had become quite glum and stopped caring about anything. These were feelings the poor lad had never had to deal with before. He still went to all the same places and did the same things, but now something felt like it was missing inside of him. The body he used to move about the green grass and the muddy banks of the pond felt hollow. His moves did not seem to be his own. This mopey attitude followed him until he could barely lift his head from the dirt. His eyelids were heavy and wet, remaining closed. Until, of course, the round, nosy toad seated himself next to him.
"Why the sad face, eh?"
asked the toad. "Nothing," replied Fluffy with a muffled throat.
doesn't look like nothing.
It's my mother, said Fluffy after a long pause. I don't know what's wrong with her. She is always sleeping and she never eats anymore. I don't know what to do.
Not eating, you say? That's a problem.
The pair fell into silence, both deep in thought. They watched the old man sitting on his same old rock, with the same old blue vest and the same old fishing pole in the water without the slightest movement. The old man began to scold himself rather harshly and rose up in anger. He stomped off, leaving boot marks in the muddy bank as he went back down the trail on a furious, unknown errand. The view was interesting until the pair turned back to the serious matter at hand.
Food for cats isn't so easy to find, said the toad.
It's hard for me. We don't eat the same things. I want to help her, but I don't know how, cried Fluffy.
Well, as far as I know, they like mice, moles, squirrels, birds.
I already know all those, Fluffy said.
Well, I suppose they like fish, too, now that I think about it.
Cats like to eat fish?
Yes, they do, but I don't know how.
The toad had planted an idea in the little turtle's head, but could not guess what would happen next as Fluffy perked up and moved toward the old man's fishing gear. The old man stomped down the dirt path more wrinkled and red-faced than usual. He was steamed over a forgotten pocket knife. The particular tool in question had many pliers on them, making them useful for pulling hooks out of fish, especially those unfortunate ones that got too anxious and gobbled their last meal and swallowed, only finding far too late the sharp surprise in the middle. Spilling over various bottles of pills and unopened spices, the old man finally found his stray metal device and made his way back to the pond, thinking all was well. But it would not last. Coming up to his sitting rock he had claimed for months, he saw that his fishing pole was nowhere to be found. All the woods watched in awe as this little turtle named Fluffy sped through the dead leaves and dirt with a fishing line in his mouth. On one end he was dragging the flimsy pole, occasionally catching small twigs and leaves. On the other end of the fishing line was an oversized red bobber and a thick, slimy bluegill helplessly flopping around, trying to escape the hook in its mouth. The glee was bursting inside of him as he rushed as fast as he could back to the hollow. "Mom! Mom!" he cried. Look! Look! I have something for you!" Lula was startled out of her slumber at the sight of what her son brought home. "How did you get that?" "I caught it back at the pond. I thought you might like it." "Fluffy, that is incredible." Lula could not keep her eyes on him much longer as her instincts overcame her, and she pounced on the flopping fish. She feasted on it with no manners whatsoever. The meat was picked clean, and the remains were left outside the hollow. While she seemed energized by the excitement, it did not take long for Lula to wind down and lazily lounge about. "Mama." "Yes?" "Why is your name Lula?" "That's just my name, dear." "Did you choose it like I chose mine?" "Well, I suppose I did." "How?" "When I was much younger, I had been chasing a bird, and she chirped at me. I was hiding in a flower bed, and the bird told me I was a nasty monster for hiding in the lilies trying to trick her. She flew away, and I looked at the flowers, wishing I was as pretty as lilies. So I made up Lula because it kind of sounds like lilies. Maybe that's stupid. I think you're pretty, Mom. She could say no more to his deep, enormous eyes. She kissed her son generously for his efforts. The large smile he wore so well was back. He wished this moment would last forever. The catching of that yummy fish, much to Fluffy's dismay, turned out to be a one-time miracle. He had merely dragged the pole out of the water with a fish on it. The how behind it all had remained a mystery. Even when he managed to drag the pole back near the water, he did not have a clue as to what to do next. Winter had finally shown its ugly side. Snow had begun to fall as the chill crept into the air. Lula seemed particularly vexed by the weather, but Fluffy was fascinated. He did not care for the cold, but found the snow fun to roll in and eat on occasion. The fun was often cut short by his mother calling him to be close to her, or to not leave the hollow at all. She was not eating, and Fluffy knew it. He had exhausted himself trying to help her. As the snow continued to fall, Lula would sleep longer. Being nestled up against her was not the same as it had been in past weeks and months, as Fluffy began to see the tiny ribs of his mother stick out as she breathed at night. He decided he needed to save her, but there was nowhere to start. He ventured out to the pond one day, finding nothing but the frozen surface of the water. The toad was nowhere to be found, and neither was the old man. As the days went by, Fluffy could not bear to leave his poor mother's side. On one evening, she woke up beside him with tears in her eyes and sorrow in her voice. "My dear boy, I am so sorry." "Why, Mama? What is the matter?" "I've tried so hard, and now I've let you down." "Mama, what are you talking about?" "I've been a terrible mother to you." "No. I've been so stupid. I had no business taking you in. I should have tried harder to find other turtles so you could have had a better life and have a proper name." "My name is Fluffy." "Don't be foolish, boy. You're a turtle and I'm a cat. You don't want to be like me." "Yes, I do." "No, you don't understand." "Stop it. Don't talk like that. I don't care if I'm a turtle. My name is Fluffy, and you are my mother, and I love you." Lula buried her face in her paws, crying to herself until her strength was spent, and she was asleep once more. Fluffy could not sleep with such a weight heaped upon him. She had frightened him to his core. Yet he would not be swayed. He would not leave. The next morning the snow fell steadily, and Fluffy awoke to his mother, who was motionless. He pushed against her, and she would not move. He called her name, even yelling it in her ear, but she would not answer him. The old man looked out at the puffy white blanket over all his land. Was there ever a vision so beautiful as that? He sipped a smoldering cup of hot chocolate and shamelessly threw more and more marshmallows on top. Somehow, wintertime always made him feel like a kid again. Days long past of sledding and snowball fights and warm kisses with girls cycled through his mind, things he would never do any more. He took a seat in his ugly plaid recliner and continued to watch the snow. With another sip of his mug, he heard a hard bang against his screen door as though a rock had struck it. Arching his eyebrows and waiting for it to repeat, he went rigid in his chair. The bang came again, and he hopped up to see what was making the noise. Sliding the door open, he came upon an odd rock in the snow. He reached for it, and discovered it was not a rock at all. He picked it up and remembered the turtle he had seen by the pond a few months before. Resting him on his palm, he felt the frozen legs of the poor reptile shake in his hand. He whispered encouraging words to the little thing and turned to take him inside to warm him up. One step inside and the cold turtle bit his hand quite painfully. "What was that for?" he asked aloud. The eyes of the turtle slowly opened, and there was something profoundly hypnotic about them. Was this it? Was this where he declared himself crazy? "Where did you come from, anyway? You should be hibernating, you know." He reeled back to find a beaten trail of little turtle feet that went as far as he could see. He gazed back into the turtle's eyes, and was in disbelief at what appeared to be a turtle that had purposely tracked him down. The little reptile turned to him, and then looked out into the snow. Maybe he had gone crazy because the old man thought the turtle spoke to him, saying, "I need your help." No time was wasted. The old man roamed out into the snow in only his bathrobe and slippers, following the trail the small turtle had left behind. The snow did not bother him much, only reaching his ankles. As he continued to walk with the turtle pressed against his chest for warmth, he began to find this little adventure refreshing. The trail led him into the woods, then to a tree with a large hollow at its base. He knelt before it, peering into the hollow, finding a thin black cat lying inside. His heart softened at the sight, and he cradled the animal in his arms, returning them both to his home. They were placed before the fireplace with blankets and fine conversation. He found it strangely invigorating to have living things to talk to in his own living space. How exciting! Lula was wrapped up tightly, with only her face and nose showing. Fluffy wriggled out of his wrapping and approached his mother's face and tried to lick it the way she licked his. He cuddled up to her all night and found her awake the next morning, licking from a bowl of milk. Lula was ecstatic to see her son again, with her eyes newly opened. Lula could not hold back her tears. Her adopted boy had saved her life. As she pondered over it, she realized not only in the frozen snow he had saved her, but from the moment he hatched under her paws in that hollow, he had saved her heart from failing her. In the warmth of the old man's house, away from the cold, Lula snuggled up to Fluffy, feeling the kind of pride and joy only a mother knows.